That being said, man, let's dive right into it, man. We're gonna throw a softball out here. What we doing? What we doing? All right, man. My first pick, Paul London and Brian Kendrick, man. Now, what you and I, what we decided to do is we decided to pick a current team, and then we decided to pick a team, man, a little blast from the past. And this blast from the past for me, I have a few different ways I feel about this team. I'm not going to say they are overrated or underrated. I feel like at the time they were exactly where they needed to be. They had a style, especially amongst tag teams, where in that period of WWE, you didn't really see that much of a team like them. You know, high flying, super high pace, could be technical when they needed to be. My downfall with them is they really didn't have much of a character. You know, there's really no character building with them. It was really, you know, just a bunch of high spots, all moves, and that was it. And to me, you know, that was a detriment. Now they did have you know, some great matches and great rivalries, especially when you go back with the Mexicals, you go back with Deuce and Domino, you go back with Eminem. At one point, I believe they held the tag team titles. They actually held it twice, but their longest reign came in at over a year, 373 days. And then some unfortunate circumstances, man, got Brian Kendrick and Paul London kicked out, but especially Paul London. Paul London, to me, man, his moveset was crazy. Brian Kendrick, man, he had a pretty extensive career, not only in WWE, but in pro wrestling as a whole. But now I say all that to say this. I feel like they could have been bigger than they were. But I feel like their careers were hindered, man, because all they could do was flip around in the ring. There was really no depth to them. But I feel like at the time, for what they were and who they were, I feel like, man, they were one of the best tag teams in that specific era. Now, they didn't last long. I think they were only together about 3 years. But when you look at, you know, okay, if I had to put a tag team on the card and you wanted to have a good match or an exciting match, you put these two guys out there. Now, were there other tag teams that were leaps and bounds better than them? Of course they were. But again, I'm talking about for their style, for that era. I mean, it really wasn't much they could do. I mean, you know, you still kind of had the cruiserweights being the thing back then. But other than that, man, outside of like Rey Mysterio and the Select Feud, guys this size weren't really doing much of anything. If you weren't a comedy act or just in a random tag team, you really wasn't doing much. So for what they were, you know, I definitely say in the ring, good. Character-wise, not so much, which is why I say, man, they cool where they at. But I do feel like the one thing that kind of stopping them from being any better than what they were, man, just a lack of personality. You're on mute, bro. I think. Hold on. Uh-oh. I can't hear you.
Oh, my bad. You're not wrong about what you know, you're not wrong about what you were saying, but I feel like for that time of who was around, yeah, they were one of the exciting teams, but they were, you know, like you say, they were more of a flip-de-do team. They, you know, there really wasn't too much. I mean, they weren't bad as far as in-ring. They were overrated. Like they were an exciting team because of the spots, because of the high flying, because of the stuff that they were willing to do. But they were really no real threat to anybody. So it's like, man, it's like they're one of those teams where it's like they were good, but yeah, you know, they weren't nobody. They weren't really everlasting to me.
Oh, and that's the thing. That's
like, I remember them, but they, you know, it wasn't like, man, when I think of tag team, they probably won't be in my top 20.
Exactly. And me neither. But that's why I said, you know, they lack depth, because outside of the spots, you really didn't have much in them, you know, because character-wise, nobody really had a character you could really get behind. Only you can get behind was the fact they could do some cool shit. But other than that, I would say their probably most noticeable match was the match where I believe it was them, the Hardys, Eminem, And I feel like I may be missing one more scene where Joey Mercury got his nose broke.
Oh, that was the Hardy Boys.
Was it the Hardy Boys? Just them three?
It was the Hardy Boys. It was the Hardys. You had the world's greatest tag team, Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas.
Yeah.
I want to say around that time you also had Legacy, or they were starting to form. It really wasn't a lot of tag teams, because a lot of those guys were, you know, singles guys that were becoming tag teams too. You know, the RVD and Kane, and then the Hurricane and Kane, and you know, stuff like that, man. So you had a lot of those teams. But if I gotta think about, because when I think about some of the teams that were around, the Los Guerreros, it's like Brian Kendrick and Paul London are definitely they're not at the top of that list for me.